Greetings, folks. Welcome. I don't know about you, but when our family travels, we like to seek out spots with great amenities. A hotel with a pool, a beach for walking, maybe an amusement park, and definitely great restaurants. But amenities are not just important to economists when they travel. Amenities are important to the economic development of regions, too. We can think of amenities as features of a place that provide enjoyment or comfort. In other words, they are the nice things that attract households to a region, and amenities are important to tourists when seeking out a place to visit. Although individuals have different preferences when it comes to amenities, some of the top amenities for many people include pleasant weather, low crime, proximity to the ocean, or perhaps mountains, recreational opportunities, and simply fun things to do. Quite a few studies have looked at the effects of amenities on regional economic growth and development. In a study that focused on rural areas of the United States, David McGranahan found that counties with high levels of natural amenities had population growth rates that averaged 120% between 1970 and 1996, whereas low amenity rural areas grew by an average of just 1%. A study by Steve Deller and colleagues also focused on amenities in rural areas, but they considered population growth, similar to McGranahan, but also employment and wage growth between 1985 and 1995. They found that a wide range of amenities positively impacted these regional economic indicators. Whereas the studies by David McGranahan and Steve Deller examined rural areas, Edward Glaser and colleagues focused on urban amenities and what they called a consumer city, where a consumer city attempts to measure what people are looking for when selecting a city. It could be a wide range of services, things like live theater, professional baseball team, or good restaurants, and consumer goods, things like an Apple store or Trader Joe's. Another aspect of a consumer city is pleasant amenities in a desirable setting, for example, nice weather. Other features of a region that are important when people are selecting a city are good public services, things like good schools and low crime, and a region that is easy to navigate. This could be the result of public transportation or a good road network. Glaser and colleagues pulled together these four features of cities, again, services, amenities, public services, and ease of navigation, and suggested that amenity-rich cities can lift the productivity of people, just like industry clusters provide productivity advantages to businesses. I know that I'm certainly more productive in a place with good infrastructure and amenities. And in their research, Glaser found that high amenity cities, especially places with a pleasant climate, experienced more robust population growth between 1977 and 1995, just like McGranahan found with the importance of amenities to rural population growth. I just talked about a few studies of how amenities affect population, employment, and wage growth. But there's a second approach to analyzing amenities called hedonic analysis. The basic premise underlying hedonic analysis is that amenities are actually priced into local labor and housing markets, and in particular will accept lower wages and or pay higher housing costs to live in amenity-rich areas. If I moved from my home in Maine to somewhere in Hawaii, I'd be picking up about 70 degrees during the winter months. But I would be paying considerably more for housing and perhaps earning less money as the price for being able to wear shorts in January. If you flip this logic on its head, then it's also the case that people require higher wages and or lower housing costs to live in places with fewer amenities or an abundance of disamenities. Using this idea that we pay for amenities through higher housing costs and lower wages, we can look at measures of housing affordability to give us clues about high amenity metropolitan areas. Glaser and colleagues actually did a similar type of analysis in the Consumer City article. This scatter plot has housing values on the y-axis and median incomes on the x-axis. Of course, these two variables are highly correlated because places with high incomes tend to have high housing values. The upward sloping trend line, which is actually a curve, shows this positive relationship between housing values and incomes, and points on the line represent the predicted value of housing for a given amount of income. If a point is above the curve, it means that housing values are more expensive given the region's incomes. In other words, people are accepting lower wages and or paying higher housing costs to live in these regions, presumably at least in part due to amenities. And the points that are farthest above the curve are assumed to have the highest amenities, while points below the curve have less desirable amenities. In the figure, you see that the points for San Luis Obispo, Santa Cruz, Honolulu, and Barnstable, Mass., that's Cape Cod, are well above the curve, and these places are certainly well known for their amenities. Here's a list of the top 10 U.S. metropolitan areas for amenities based on the results of the previous scatter plot. It tells us that California not only knows how to party, but its cities rank very high for amenities. And I should point out that this list has an almost 100% overlap with the places identified as having high amenities by Ed Glazer and colleagues. If you consider both of the types of studies that analyze amenities, you might think that we have some sort of a puzzle. Recall from earlier in the video when I talked about studies that found amenities lead to higher population growth. But if we pay to be around amenities, as is suggested by the hedonic analysis studies, then amenities shouldn't lead to as much or even any population growth. If I think about myself, I could contribute to the population growth of Honolulu by moving there in search of nice weather and proximity to the beach. But because of the high housing cost relative to wages, I am staying put in Maine. Likewise, the idea of hedonic analysis suggests that people will accept lower wages to be around amenities. This certainly calls into question the possibility that amenities increase wages. In other words, since lower wages are the price we pay for amenities, wages should actually be lower in amenity-rich areas. So although some of the studies that show amenities impact population and wages, and other research that uses a hedonic approach might appear to be at odds, we can reconcile the two approaches to studying amenities by thinking about whether markets, that is the housing market and the labor market, are in equilibrium. If these markets are in equilibrium, amenities are priced into wages and housing costs, which means people are not as apt to move into amenity-rich areas. If these markets are in disequilibrium, for example, due to an increase in the preference for amenities are not immediately priced into the market, and more people might move into high amenity regions. With all of this in mind, let's look at some analysis of the relationship between the economic development of U.S. regions and amenities. And for starters, let's consider climate as measured by average January low temperature. This scatter plot has the Economic Development Index on the y-axis, which is a combination of the employment, income, and persistence indices, so it captures the growth of good jobs in a metropolitan area. And the average January low temperature is plotted on the side-to-side, or x-axis. At the far right, you see Honolulu with the warmest average January low temperature of around 65 degrees. This means that it gets down to 65 degrees on a January night in Honolulu. Bangor, Maine, which is my hometown, gets down to about 5 degrees on a January night. It's so cold that my dog does not want to go outside to play. And it's not just my dog that dislikes cold winters, because the scatter plot shows a positive relationship between the economic development of regions and winter temperatures. The trend line is shown as a solid line because it's a statistically significant effect. To give you an idea of how climate affects economic development, here's a figure that summarizes the effects of January temperature on the employment, income, and persistence indices, as well as the overall economic development index that we just looked at in the scatter plot. The height of the bars represents the size of the impact in terms of standard deviations when we increase the average January low temperature by 1 standard deviation. As an example, the last bar, which is labeled as Economic Development Index, tells us that a 1 standard deviation increase in a metropolitan area's average January low temperature corresponds with about a 0.15 standard deviation increase in the Economic Development Index. The bars are shaded in red to indicate results that are statistically significant. We see that a pleasant winter climate positively impacts the growth of regions, as measured by the Employment Index. Also, places with a nice winter climate have more persistent employment over time. In other words, less ups and downs that are typically found in places that rely on lots of tourists during the summer, but fewer visitors in the winter. This makes sense because if the winter has nice weather, a place is less apt to have as big of a contrast between the number of summer and wintertime tourists. Finally, the results show that the income index is lower in places with warmer winter temperatures. This is consistent with the idea that lower incomes are the price to pay for nice weather. So to summarize what we learned about climate and economic development, the results show that warm winters contribute to overall economic development, but this result is due to the effects of warm winters on employment growth and persistence. And this bottom line that climate affects the growth of regions is very similar to what Edward Glaeser noted in the book Triumph of the City. And it's interesting that Glaeser's quote about climate is actually in the context of the impacts of human capital, that is, education, on the growth of cities. When discussing the prime importance of education to urban growth, Glaeser writes, education is, after January temperature, the most reliable predictor of urban growth, especially among older cities. In other words, January climate has a very large impact on the growth of cities. I'll have more to say about the impacts of amenities on economic development in a second video, but for now, let's end with a few key takeaways. First, past research has taken a couple of approaches when analyzing amenities. Past studies show that amenities have a positive impact on aspects of regional growth and development, but these impacts might be tempered by the fact that amenities are actually priced into wages and housing prices, as suggested by the hedonic approach to studying amenities. Second, analysis of the economic development of U.S. regions shows that warm winters help the growth of U.S. metropolitan areas, but warm winters do not positively impact incomes.